Ambassador Cuthbert stepped off his shuttle and onto the empty dock of what used to be Earth's main orbital station. His forearms moved nervously as he looked around the vast space that should have been filled with human workers, traders, and travelers. Instead, only the quiet hum of machines filled the air. The lights were on, the air was clean and warm, but there were no humans anywhere. 3 months had passed since the last human had been seen in known space. 3 months since. Every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost had gone silent at exactly the same moment. Not destroyed, not conquered, just empty. It was as if an entire species had simply decided to vanish. Cathvar walked slowly through the station corridors. Coffee cups sat on tables, still half full but long cold. Workstations showed active. Screens with half-finished reports. In the residential areas, personal belongings were neatly arranged, beds were made, and family photos still smiled from their frames. Everything looked normal, except for the complete absence of the people who had lived here. The Zephyr Ambassador had been one of the council members who voted to restrict human expansion just 4 months ago. The council meeting had been heated, with all the major galactic powers agreeing that humanity was growing too fast and becoming too powerful. The humans had been in space for less than 200 years, yet they had already established colonies on 47 worlds and made contact with over 300 species. Commander Jake Morrison had been humanity's representative at that final council session. Cathvar remembered the human's calm face as the vote was announced. The restrictions were severe. No new colonies for 50 years, no military ships beyond their home system, and no technological trading with species outside. The council's approval. Jake had simply nodded and said humanity would consider the council's decision carefully. That had been the last time anyone saw him or any other human dock captain. Lisa Harper had been leading humanity's most successful exploration fleet. Her ships had discovered 17 new habitable worlds in just 2 years, a feat that had taken the ancient Zephyrian Empire 3 centuries to accomplish. The Council feared that at this rate, humans would soon control more territory than any other species. They needed to be stopped before they became unstoppable. But when the Council's enforcement fleet arrived at Earth to begin implementing the restrictions, they found the home world of humanity completely abandoned. Cities stood empty, but perfectly maintained. Power plants continued running. Traffic systems directed no traffic. Gardens were watered by automatic systems, but no one was there to enjoy the flowers. Cathvar accessed the station's central computer. The artificial intelligence responded immediately in its pleasant human-programmed voice. All systems were functioning normally. Life support was operating at full capacity for a population of 50,000, though current occupancy was 0. The AI seemed unaware that anything was wrong. When asked about the humans, it simply stated that all residents had departed on schedule for an undisclosed location. Reports from other council fleets painted the same strange picture across human space. New Denver, humanity's largest agricultural colony, was found with crops growing in empty fields, harvested by machines that delivered food to empty storage facilities. The planetary defense systems were still active, scanning space for threats. To protect No One. Kepler Station, humanity's main research facility, had been abandoned with experiments still running. Automated laboratories continued their work, following programs set by scientists who were no longer there to see the results. The data suggested that humans had been working on projects far more advanced than anything they had ever shared with the Council. The mining colony on Titan 7 showed the most puzzling evidence. The massive excavation equipment was gone, but there were no signs of it being dismantled or transported away. The machinery had simply vanished, leaving behind perfectly smooth rock faces where valuable minerals had been extracted right up until the moment of departure. Dr. Amy Chun had been the head researcher at the medical facility on Luna Base. Her laboratory was found with active experiments, detailed notes, and what appeared to be breakthrough treatments for diseases that affected several council species. Her final log entry mentioned something called Project Departure, but gave no details about what it involved. Kethvar found Jake Morrison's office in the station's diplomatic section. The desk was clean, files were organized, and a small earth plant sat by the window, still green and healthy, thanks to the automated care system. A framed picture showed Jake with his family at some human celebration, all of them smiling. The ambassador wondered where they were now, and why they had left everything behind. The human military installations told the most disturbing story. Admiral Roy Taylor's secret bases had been found completely stripped of equipment, but the Council's investigation teams could find no records of where the weapons and ships had gone. Hangar bays designed to hold hundreds of vessels were empty, but there were no launch records, no flight plans, no indication of where an entire fleet might have traveled. What made the situation even stranger was that humanity's automated systems continued to function as if their creators might return at any moment. Bills were being paid from accounts that seemed to have unlimited funds. Maintenance robots repaired equipment that no one used. Communication networks stayed active, ready to carry messages between empty worlds. The Council had expected anger from humanity. They had prepared for protests, negotiations, perhaps even military resistance. What they had not expected was complete silence followed by total disappearance. It was as if humanity had simply decided the galaxy was no longer worth their attention. Captain Steve Johnson had been known for his deep space exploration missions, pushing further into unknown regions than any other human explorer. His ship logs, found in the abandoned fleet records, showed course plots that extended far beyond the galactic rim into regions that Council science claimed were impossible to reach with current technology. Some Council members suggested that humanity had destroyed itself rather than accept the restrictions. But there were no signs of destruction anywhere. No bodies, no debris, no evidence of any kind of catastrophe. Everything was simply empty and waiting. Engineer Karen Williams had left behind technical specifications for human ships that surprised the Council's experts. The fusion drives that humans claimed to use for interstellar travel were apparently just cover systems. The real propulsion technology was far more advanced, capable of speeds that should have been impossible, according to Council physics. As Kethvar prepared to leave the empty station, he accessed one final message that had been left in the diplomatic archives. It was from Commander Jake Morrison, recorded just hours before humanity's departure. His voice was calm and professional as always. The message was simple and direct. Humanity thanked the Council for their years of cooperation and regretted that they could not accept the proposed restrictions. They were leaving to pursue opportunities elsewhere and wished the Council species well in their future endeavors. There was no anger, no threats, no demands. Just a polite goodbye from an entire civilization. The message ended with coordinates that led to regions of space beyond the galactic edge, places where no Council ship had ever traveled. Jake Morrison's final words were that any species seeking genuine cooperation and mutual respect would always be welcome to make contact. Kethvar realized as he left the empty station that the Council had made a terrible mistake. They had not restricted humanity's growth. They had simply encouraged humanity to grow somewhere else, taking all their knowledge, technology, and potential with them. The galaxy suddenly felt much larger and much emptier than it had before. Council investigator Thexani had seen many mysteries during her long career, but nothing like this. She stood in the middle of what had been the central plaza of New Denver, humanity's largest agricultural colony. Children's toys were scattered around a playground where no children played. Shops stood open with their goods still on display, but no customers would ever come to buy them. Her investigation team moved through the empty streets, documenting everything they found. The colony's 20,000 residents had vanished without a trace, but they had left behind a functioning society. Street lights turned on at sunset. The public transportation system ran its routes on schedule, carrying no passengers. Even the local government's automated systems continued to process paperwork for citizens, who no longer existed. Dr. Amy Chun's research facility sat on a hill overlooking the main settlement. Vexani had visited this place many times before, when it was full of human scientists working on medical breakthroughs that benefited species across the galaxy. Now the laboratories hummed with the sound of experiments that continued without their creators. Amy's personal office contained detailed research notes written in her careful handwriting. The final entries mentioned Project Departure, a classified initiative that apparently involved not just the medical facility, but every human installation in the galaxy. The notes were frustratingly vague, referring to coordinates and timetables. Without explaining what they meant, the investigators' team had found similar references to Project Departure on every abandoned human world. It appeared to have been a coordinated effort involving the entire species, planned months or perhaps years in advance. Yet no Council intelligence service had detected any signs of such massive preparation. On Kepler 442b, humanity's main industrial world, the investigation team found the most disturbing evidence yet. The planet's factories were still running, producing goods that no one would collect. But more importantly, they found records showing that human production had been gradually shifting over the past year. Instead of making consumer goods for the galactic market, the factories had been producing components for unknown projects. Captain Lisa Harper's exploration headquarters yielded the next clue. Her personal files contained star charts that extended far beyond known space, with detailed notations about resources, gravitational fields, and something called transition points. These charts showed a level of astronomical knowledge that surpassed anything the Council's best scientists possessed. The transition points were particularly puzzling. They appeared to be locations in space where Lisa believed it was possible to achieve faster-than-light travel using principles that Council physics said were impossible. Yet her navigation logs showed that human ships had been using these points regularly for over 5 years. Reports began filtering in from across the galaxy that made the situation even more confusing. The hegemony of Vex discovered that several of their outer colonies had also vanished, but not in the same way as the human settlements. These Vex colonies had been completely relocated, with every building, every piece of equipment, and every resident moved to unknown locations. The missing Vex settlements had all been places where humans had maintained trading posts or research stations. Mining operations that had employed thousands of Vex workers were found empty, but the valuable minerals they had been extracting were gone too. It was as if someone had carefully packed up entire communities and moved them somewhere else. Vex Gani interviewed the last Vex miners who had worked alongside humans before the disappearance. They told strange stories about human supervisors who had been asking odd questions about their families, their living conditions, and whether they were happy with their current situation. The humans had seemed unusually interested in the personal lives of their alien coworkers. More disturbing reports came from the Crystal Confederation. 3 of their research stations, all located in remote star systems, had gone silent at the same time as humanity's departure. Investigation teams found the stations abandoned, but with signs that valuable scientific equipment had been carefully removed. The Confederation's most advanced scientists had also vanished, leaving behind only junior researchers who claimed to know nothing about where their colleagues had gone. Admiral Roy Taylor's military bases provided the most shocking revelations. Hidden deep in classified files, Vexani's team discovered that humanity's military technology was decades ahead of what they had ever revealed to the Council. The fusion drives that human ships supposedly used for propulsion were actually secondary systems. The real engines operated on principles that allowed travel between star systems in days rather than months. The investigation team found construction records for ships that were far larger than any human vessel the Council had ever seen. These massive craft were designed to carry not just crew and cargo, but entire populations. The records suggested that humanity had been building evacuation ships for years, preparing for the day when they might need to leave the galaxy entirely. Captain Steve Johnson's exploration logs revealed that humanity had been in contact with civilizations beyond the galactic rim for over a decade. These extragalactic species had technology that made even humanity's secret advances look primitive. More importantly, they had been sharing this technology with humans exclusively, teaching them how to travel between galaxies and establish colonies in previously unreachable regions of space. The logs showed that Steve had made dozens of trips beyond the galaxy's edge, each time bringing back new knowledge and new technologies. His ship had been equipped with drives that could cross the void between galaxies in a matter of weeks, something the Council had believed was impossible for any known species. Engineer Karen Williams had left behind technical specifications that revealed the true scope of human capabilities. What the Council had seen as humanity's impressive but limited technology was actually just the tip of an enormous iceberg. Humans had developed manufacturing techniques that could build entire cities in months, terraforming methods that could make any world habitable, and communication systems that worked across intergalactic distances. The most disturbing discovery came from the abandoned human embassy on the Council's home world. Hidden in diplomatic files was a complete analysis of every Council species, documenting their strengths, weaknesses, technological capabilities, and potential for future development. The analysis was detailed enough to suggest that humans had been studying the galaxy's species for years, deciding which ones might be worth saving. President Martin Lewis had been humanity's top diplomat, known for his skill in negotiating treaties and resolving conflicts between species. His final report to the human government painted a grim picture of the galaxy's future. According to Martin's analysis, the Council's elder races were stagnating, more interested in maintaining their power than in exploring new possibilities or helping younger species develop. The report recommended that humanity focus its efforts on species that showed potential for growth and cooperation, while avoiding further entanglement with the Council's political games. It suggested that humanity's time would be better spent building relationships with extragalactic civilizations that shared their values of exploration and mutual development. Exani realized that the investigation was revealing more than just humanity's disappearance. It was exposing the fact that humans had never really been the junior partners in galactic civilization that everyone had assumed. They had been quietly building a separate network of relationships and capabilities that dwarfed anything the Council possessed. The final piece of evidence came from Dr. Linda Roberts, a Zephyrian scientist who had worked closely with human researchers for decades. She had left behind a message explaining that she was joining the human exodus because she believed they offered the best hope for scientific advancement and peaceful cooperation. Her message revealed that the invitation to leave had been extended to individuals from many species, not just humans. Scientists, engineers, artists, and thinkers from across the galaxy had been quietly contacted and offered the chance to join humanity's journey to something better. Many had accepted, explaining why so many of the galaxy's most talented individuals had also vanished. As the Exali compiled her final report, she realized that the Council had not lost just humanity. They had lost the most innovative, forward-thinking members of their own species as well. The galaxy had not been abandoned by invaders or destroyed by war. It had been quietly evacuated by anyone who believed there was something better waiting among the stars. The council chamber had never felt so empty, even though all the major representatives were present. Kethver looked around at his fellow ambassadors and saw the same expression on every face that he felt on his own. They had made a terrible mistake, and they were only beginning to understand how terrible it truly was. Vexani stood at the center of the chamber, presenting her investigation findings to the assembled council members. Her voice was steady, but her words carried implications that shook the foundations of everything they thought they knew about humanity and their place in the galaxy. The evidence was overwhelming. Humanity had not been the growing threat that the council had feared. They had been the galaxy's most advanced civilization, carefully hiding their true capabilities while quietly building relationships with species and technologies far beyond the council's understanding. Admiral Roy Taylor's secret installations had contained gravitational manipulation devices that could reshape entire solar systems. The humans had been capable of moving planets, creating artificial stars, and building structures that dwarfed anything in council space. Yet they had never used these capabilities aggressively, or even revealed that they possessed them. Captain Steve Johnson's exploration records showed that humanity had been in contact with extragalactic civilizations for over 15 years. These beings, calling themselves the Andromeda Collective, possessed technology that made interstellar travel as simple as walking between rooms. They had been sharing this knowledge with humanity, teaching them to think on a galactic and intergalactic scale. The most shocking revelation was that humanity's entire presence in the Milky Way had been temporary from the beginning. They had not evolved in this galaxy at all, but had arrived as part of an Andromeda Collective mission to study and evaluate the local species. Their colonies, their ships, their entire civilization and council space had been an elaborate research station designed to last just long enough to complete their assessment. Engineer Karen Williams' personal files revealed the truth about human technology. Their fusion drives were not their main propulsion system, but rather a primitive backup used only when traveling in areas where their real technology might be detected. Human ships were actually powered by zero-point energy extractors that drew power directly from the fabric of space itself. The technical specifications showed that a single human vessel could generate more energy than the entire Zephyrian Empire's power grid. Their manufacturing capabilities were equally advanced, able to convert raw matter into any needed material at the molecular level. They could have terraformed barren worlds into paradise in a matter of months, but had chosen instead to settle only on worlds that were already suitable for life. Dr. Amy Chun's medical research had not been primitive human science struggling to catch up with galactic standards. It had been advanced Andromedan medicine being carefully adapted to help local species without revealing its true origin. Her treatments for council diseases had been based on technologies that could have extended lifespans indefinitely, or even brought the dead back to life. The realization hit the council members like a physical blow. Humanity had not been learning from galactic civilization. They had been teaching it, sharing carefully selected pieces of their knowledge to help other species develop while hiding the full extent of their capabilities. President Martin Lewis had been far more than a skilled diplomat. His files revealed that he was actually a senior researcher in what amounted to the largest anthropological study ever conducted. For over 2 centuries, humanity had been documenting the development, psychology, and potential of every species in the galaxy. The study's conclusions were brutal in their honesty. Most council species had reached their peak development centuries ago and were now slowly declining. They had become comfortable with their current level of technology and social organization, showing little interest in genuine growth or exploration beyond their established territories. The younger species showed more promise, but many were being held back by council policies that favored stability over innovation. The restrictions and bureaucracy that the elder races used to maintain their power were preventing entire civilizations from reaching their potential. Humanity's final recommendation had been clear. The Milky Way galaxy was not ready for advanced civilization. Its dominant species were too focused on maintaining existing power structures to embrace the changes necessary for true development. The collective's resources would be better spent on galaxies where the local species showed greater willingness to grow and cooperate. Commander Jake Morrison had not been humanity's representative to the Council. He had been their final evaluator, sent to make one last assessment of whether the local species could be helped overcome their limitations. The vote to restrict human expansion had been his answer. The galaxy had failed its test. The missing Vex colonies had not been conquered or destroyed. They had been invited to join humanity's departure. Workers who had shown curiosity about human methods, who had asked questions about better ways of doing things, who had expressed interest in exploring beyond their current limitations, had been offered the chance to leave their stagnant society behind. The same invitation had been extended to individuals from every council species. Scientists like Dr. Linda Roberts, who had worked closely with humans and demonstrated genuine intellectual curiosity, had been given the opportunity to join a civilization that valued growth over stability. Captain Lisa Harper's exploration fleet had not been discovering new worlds for human expansion. They had been mapping resources and suitable locations for other species, who might eventually be ready to leave the Council's restrictive influence. The 17 habitable worlds they had found had been prepared as refuge sites for species that might someday choose to break free from galactic stagnation. The Council members sat in stunned silence as the Exani finished her presentation. They had not driven away a threat to their power. They had convinced their teachers to abandon them as hopeless students. The galaxy's most advanced civilization had been living among them for centuries, offering guidance and assistance, only to finally conclude that their help was not wanted. Admiral Roy Taylor's military bases had not been preparation for conquest. They had been preparation for evacuation. The massive ships found in construction records had been designed to carry entire populations safely across the intergalactic void. Humanity had been building lifeboats for any species wise enough to accept passage to something better, the automated systems continuing to function in abandoned human facilities took on new meaning. They were not just maintaining empty buildings. They were keeping the infrastructure ready in case any council species eventually developed enough to deserve another chance. The lights stayed on, the air stayed clean, and the machinery stayed ready for occupants who might never come. Captain Steve Johnson's star charts showed transition points throughout the galaxy, locations where Andromedan technology could create gateways to other regions of space. These points remained active, monitored by hidden systems that would respond if any local species achieved the technological and social development necessary to use them safely. Engineer Karen Williams had left behind more than technical specifications. She had left a complete guide to post-scarcity civilization, explaining how species could move beyond the limitations of resource competition and territorial disputes. The technology existed to provide unlimited energy, materials, and living space for every being in the galaxy. Humanity had been waiting for the council species to mature enough to handle such power responsibly. The evidence showed that humanity's departure had not been motivated by anger or defiance. It had been an act of patience finally exhausted. They had spent centuries trying to help the galaxy's species develop beyond their current limitations. But the vote to restrict human expansion had proven that the major powers preferred stagnation to growth. Dr. Amy Chun's final research notes contained a message that summarized humanity's conclusion. The species of the Milky Way were not evil or hopeless, but they had become comfortable with mediocrity. They chose familiar problems over unfamiliar solutions, temporary security over lasting growth, and local power over galactic cooperation. The message: ended with coordinates leading to beacon stations, positioned throughout the galaxy. These stations would remain active for 1,000 local years, broadcasting information about how to contact the Andromedan Collective. Any species that developed sufficiently during that time would be welcome to apply for membership in the Greater Galactic Community. As the council session ended, Cathfer realized that they were no longer the galaxy's ruling powers. They had become its caretakers, left behind to manage a civilization that their former teachers had concluded was not yet ready for advancement. The question now was whether they would use this knowledge to finally grow beyond their limitations, or whether they would simply continue managing decline until the beacons finally went silent. 6 months after humanity's departure, the first major trade route collapsed. The commercial shipping lane between the Zephyrian Empire and the Crystal Confederation had been managed by human logistics companies that coordinated cargo transfers, maintained waystation facilities, and provided security services for merchant vessels traveling the dangerous passage through the Void Nebula. Without human management, the waystations ran out of supplies. Pirates, who had been kept away by human patrol ships, began attacking merchant convoys. The insurance costs for shipping became so high that trade between the two major powers ground to a halt. Ancient commercial relationships that had lasted for centuries ended within weeks. Commander Brad Wilson had been right in his final transmission to the Council. He had warned that humanity served as the galaxy's connective tissue, linking distant civilizations through trade networks, diplomatic channels, and shared technological development. Without humans facilitating these connections, the galaxy was fracturing back into isolated regions that had little contact with each other. The economic collapse spread faster than anyone had expected. Human companies had provided critical services throughout known space, often in ways that other species had not fully understood. When these services vanished, the gaps could not be quickly filled by local alternatives. On the manufacturing world of Vex Prime, production lines shut down because they depended on rare materials that had been supplied by human mining operations in distant star systems. The Vex had never developed their own deep space mining capabilities, relying instead on human expertise to extract resources from hostile environments that their own people could not safely access. The Crystal Confederation faced a medical crisis. When their population began showing symptoms of a plague that human-developed medicines had been keeping under control, Dr. Amy Chun's research facility had been producing vaccines and treatments that were distributed throughout Confederation space. But the automated systems could not adapt their production to handle new mutations of the disease. President Martin Lewis had established diplomatic protocols that allowed dozens of minor species to resolve conflicts peacefully instead of fighting costly wars. His mediation services had prevented 17 armed conflicts in the past decade alone. Without human diplomats to facilitate negotiations, old territorial disputes began flaring back into violence. The hegemony of Vex discovered that their food production systems were failing because they had become dependent on human agricultural consultants. Human experts had developed crop rotation methods, soil treatment techniques, and pest control systems that increased yields dramatically. Without this knowledge, Vex farmers watched their harvests decline year after year. Admiral Roy Taylor's security forces had been quietly preventing conflicts throughout the galaxy, not through military action, but through intelligence gathering and early intervention. Human agents would identify potential trouble spots and work behind the scenes to resolve problems before they escalated into major crises. Without this stabilizing influence, dozens of minor conflicts erupted simultaneously across known space. The communication networks that connected distant worlds began failing as human-maintained relay stations went offline. These stations required regular maintenance and periodic upgrades that only human technicians had been trained to perform. As the network degraded, Isolated worlds found themselves cut off from galactic civilization entirely. Captain Lisa Harper's exploration activities had been providing the galaxy with a constant stream of new discoveries, new resources, and new opportunities for expansion. Her surveys had identified hundreds of potentially valuable worlds, asteroid fields rich in rare minerals, and energy sources that could power entire civilizations. Without continued exploration, the galaxy's growth stagnated completely. The most devastating realization came when the Council's military forces discovered that they could no longer effectively patrol their own territories. Human ships had been providing sensor coverage, communication links, and rapid response capabilities that had made galactic law enforcement possible. Without these support systems, pirates and raiders operated with impunity, while naval forces struggled to coordinate even basic patrol missions. Engineer Karen Williams had designed the power distribution systems that supplied energy to over 300 worlds. Her fusion reactors and transmission networks had been so reliable that local governments had never bothered to develop backup systems. When the human-built infrastructure began requiring maintenance that no one else knew how to perform, entire civilizations faced power shortages. The research and development sectors collapsed as scientists realized how much of their work had been based on human foundations. Technologies that they had thought were indigenous developments turned out to be adaptations of human innovations. Without access to the underlying principles, further advancement became impossible. Captain Steve Johnson's deep space monitoring stations had been tracking dangerous phenomena like stellar collapses, gamma-ray bursts, and rogue black holes. The early warning systems he had established had saved countless lives by giving populations time to evacuate before cosmic disasters struck their worlds. With the monitoring network offline, several civilizations were caught unprepared by natural catastrophes that could have been predicted. The educational systems throughout the galaxy had been enriched by human teachers who brought knowledge from advanced Andromedan civilization. Students who had been learning cutting-edge science, mathematics, and philosophy found themselves limited to the more primitive understanding of their own species' educators. An entire generation grew up with diminished opportunities for intellectual development. Commander Jake Morrison's final message began to seem prophetic as the months passed. He had warned that the Council species would discover what the galaxy looked like without human growth and innovation. The reality was worse than anyone had imagined. It was not just that progress had stopped, but that existing systems were actively declining without human maintenance and guidance. The psychological impact proved as damaging as the practical problems. Species that had thought of themselves as advanced and sophisticated were forced to confront the fact that much of their perceived success had been built on human support. The confidence and optimism that had characterized galactic civilization for centuries gave way to uncertainty and despair. Dr. Linda Roberts' departure had been part of a larger exodus that nobody had initially noticed. The galaxy's most talented individuals, the scientists and engineers and artists who drove innovation and cultural development, had quietly left with humanity. The remaining populations found themselves led by administrators and bureaucrats who were skilled at managing existing systems, but incapable of creating new ones. The beacon stations that humanity had left behind became focal points for growing desperation. Ships from dozens of species began gathering around these mysterious devices, hoping for some sign of how to re-establish contact with the departed humans. The beacons remained silent, their alien technology incomprehensible to anyone who tried to study them. Some species attempted to reverse engineer abandoned human technology, but the devices were built using principles that required centuries of advanced development to understand. Every attempt to copy human innovations resulted in failure, often catastrophic failure that made the situation worse rather than better. The social structures that had maintained galactic civilization began breaking down as different species blamed each other for humanity's departure. The Zephyrians accused the Vex of being too aggressive during the council vote. The Crystal Confederation claimed that everyone else had been too rigid in their thinking. Old prejudices and rivalries that had been suppressed by human diplomatic efforts resurged with devastating intensity. Trade wars erupted as different regions competed for the shrinking pool of resources that had once been managed efficiently by human logistics networks. Species that had cooperated peacefully for centuries found themselves fighting over supply routes, mining rights, and territorial boundaries. The council chambers themselves became a symbol of failure. Representatives continued to meet and debate, but they had no real solutions to offer their constituents. The grand halls that had once hosted discussions about galactic expansion and technological advancement now echoed with arguments about resource allocation and damage control. As the first year of humanity's absence drew to a close, it became clear that the galaxy was not just missing one species. It was missing the species that had been secretly holding everything else together. The network of relationships, technologies, and services that humanity had built was so comprehensive and sophisticated that its loss left the remaining civilizations struggling to maintain even basic functionality. The council members who had voted to restrict human expansion were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. They had not been protecting the galaxy from a rising threat. They had been destroying the very foundation that made galactic civilization possible. Their fear of human growth had ended up eliminating growth entirely, leaving behind a galaxy that was slowly but inevitably sliding backward toward isolation and decline. The transmission arrived on a quiet morning, 2 years after humanity's departure, broadcasting simultaneously from every beacon station throughout the galaxy. Council monitoring stations detected the signal first, but within hours it was being received by communication arrays on thousands of worlds. The message was clear, powerful, and transmitted in the native language of every species that heard it. Admiral Jake Morrison appeared on screens across known space, but he looked different than the council members' remembers. He stood on what appeared to be the bridge of a massive starship, wearing clothes made from materials that seemed to shift and shimmer with their own inner light. Behind him, huge windows showed a view of space that contained more stars than should have been visible from any single location. His voice carried the same calm professionalism that had marked his service as humanity's representative. But now, there was something else in his tone. Confidence, perhaps, or satisfaction. He spoke as someone who had found exactly what he had been looking for. The message was simple, but devastating in its implications. Jake explained that humanity had successfully established new colonies in the Andromeda Galaxy, where they had joined a confederation of advanced species committed to genuine cooperation and mutual development. The transition had been smooth, and human settlers were thriving in their new environment. More importantly, the Andromedan Collective was now prepared to welcome other species from the Milky Way. Relay stations were being established at strategic points along the galactic rim, offering passage to any civilization ready to leave behind the limitations and conflicts of their current existence. The images that accompanied Jake's words showed cities that defied comprehension, structures that seemed to be grown rather than built, stretched across landscapes of impossible beauty. Gardens floating in midair provided food and recreation for beings from dozens of different species. Transportation systems moved people and goods without any visible means of propulsion, as if gravity itself had been tamed to serve civilization's needs. Humans were visible throughout these scenes, but they were clearly just one member of a much larger community. They worked alongside beings of forms and types that no council species had ever encountered, all of them cooperating on projects that seemed to reshape reality itself. The technology on display made even humanity's hidden capabilities look primitive by comparison. Commander Lisa Harper appeared in the next segment of the transmission, standing in what looked like a vast observatory surrounded by star charts. That showed not just the Andromeda Galaxy, but dozens of other galaxies stretching away into cosmic distances. She explained that the collective included species from throughout the local galactic cluster, united by shared values of exploration, learning, and peaceful cooperation. The exploration opportunities were beyond anything possible in the Milky Way. Entire galaxies remained unmapped, filled with wonders and opportunities that could occupy explorers for millions of years. New forms of life, new types of worlds, new physical phenomena that challenged every assumption about how the universe worked. Lisa's charts showed colony sites being prepared throughout the Andromedan spiral arms, each one designed to support multiple species with different environmental needs. The terraforming technology available to the collective could create any type of world imaginable, from ocean paradises to crystalline plains, to floating cities that drifted through nebulae. Of living gas. Dr. Amy Chun's segment focused on the medical and biological sciences that the collective had mastered. Disease had been essentially eliminated, not just through treatment, but through fundamental understanding of how life itself functioned. Aging was optional, controlled by technologies that could maintain any physical form indefinitely or allow beings to evolve into new configurations as their interests and needs changed. The research opportunities were equally impressive. The collective scientists had access to phenomena that existed only in the deep intergalactic void, energy sources that dwarfed entire stars, and forms of matter that could only be studied in the vast emptiness between galaxies. Amy's laboratory was now equipped with instruments that could manipulate individual atoms with the precision of an artist painting on canvas. Captain Steve Johnson appeared next, floating in what seemed to be open space, but breathing normally and speaking without any protective equipment. He explained that the collective had mastered technologies that made the difference between vacuum and atmosphere irrelevant. Their members could live anywhere, from the surface of stars to the frozen depths of interstellar space. Steve's exploration vessel was visible behind him, a structure so large that it contained entire ecosystems within its hull. The ship was not just a means of transportation, but a mobile world, capable of supporting millions of beings while traveling between galaxies at speeds that compressed months of journey into days of subjective time. The most shocking revelation came when President Martin Lewis appeared, surrounded by representatives from dozens of species that the Council had never seen before. These beings had forms that ranged from energy patterns to living crystal matrices, to creatures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Yet they all worked together with an ease and cooperation that made galactic politics look like children arguing over toys. Martin explained that the collective operated on principles that the Milky Way species were only beginning to understand. Resources were unlimited when you could convert matter and energy at the fundamental level. Territory was irrelevant when you could create new worlds or modify existing ones to suit any need. Competition became cooperation when everyone could have everything they truly wanted. The diplomatic corps he now served included beings who had solved problems that Council species thought were impossible. War had been eliminated not through force, but through the simple expedient of making it unnecessary. When every being could have access to unlimited space, unlimited resources, and unlimited opportunities for development, the reasons for conflict simply disappeared. Engineer Corinne Williams demonstrated some of the technologies now available to humanity and their new allies. She stood next to a device no larger than a briefcase that was capable of converting raw hydrogen into element needed for construction. Another machine, barely visible in the background, was assembling what appeared to be a small moon from cosmic dust and debris. The manufacturing capabilities of the collective made scarcity obsolete. Any material, any device, any structure could be created on demand using techniques that treated matter as a programmable medium. And massive ships that had carried humanity away from the Milky Way were being constructed in real time, growing from blueprints into reality in a matter of hours. Corinne's presentation included technical specifications for devices that could benefit every species in the galaxy. Fusion reactors that produced no dangerous waste, transportation systems that moved people and goods instantly across interstellar distances, communication networks that connected minds directly without the need for crude electromagnetic signals. Dr. Linda Roberts appeared in the final segment, speaking from what looked like a vast library that contained the accumulated knowledge of hundreds of civilizations. She had aged noticeably during her time with the collective, but her eyes held a vitality and excitement that had been missing during her final years in Milky Way space. Linda explained that the learning opportunities available through the collective were beyond anything she had imagined possible. Sciences that explored the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, mathematics that described realities existing beyond the normal four dimensions, arts that created beauty by manipulating the basic forces that held the universe together. Library behind her contained not just information, but actual experiences, stored in formats that allowed beings to literally live through the discoveries and insights of others. A single afternoon of study could provide knowledge that would take centuries to acquire through conventional learning methods. The message concluded with practical information about how interested species could make contact with the collective. The relay stations positioned around the galaxy would evaluate applicants, not based on their current technological level, but on their demonstrated commitment to growth, cooperation, and peaceful development. The evaluation process would be thorough, but fair. Species would be judged not on their past mistakes, but on their potential for positive change. Those who proved themselves ready would be provided with transportation to Andromeda and assistance in establishing new colonies suited to their specific needs and preferences. Admiral Jake Morrison returned for the final words of the transmission. He acknowledged that the Council species had made mistakes, but emphasized that these mistakes were not permanent barriers to future cooperation. The collective believed in redemption through growth, and every being who genuinely committed to peaceful development would be welcomed into the greater galactic community. The message ended with coordinates for the nearest relay station and instructions for making contact. The transmission would repeat every local day for the next year, ensuring that every world in the galaxy had the opportunity to receive and consider the invitation.